today to speak something about those realities, those urban and metropolitan and regional realities. And moreover, what are the current trends, the current global trends of urban development? And how can we start to improve the management and the governance of those realities, of those of that urban and accelerating urban world, right? So I will try to give you a glance on metropolitan and regional governance around the world, and then Professor Contin will try to make those realities, those global trends, and your more specific architectural scale. No, I did my presentation parts, and the first one, this works. Okay. So the first one will be about sustainable development, no, about global agendas. Maybe you have heard a lot about global agendas, but we will make this link between global agendas, of course, cities, metropolises, territories, and architecture at the end. So my first point for this intervention, for this lecture, will be a sustainable development challenge, which are global, but also currently, nowadays, are metropolitan. People live in cities. You are used to saw and to analyze this figure. Nowadays, 50% of global population is urban, is living in cities. That is a little more than 4 billion people living in cities. And of course, it will rapidly increase during the coming and the next decades. And we are starting to see some projections from the end of this century, which told us about a world of 10 billion inhabitants, from which 9 billion, the 90%, will be urban inhabitants, will be living in cities. Notwithstanding that, approximately 1 billion people of today's urban population is still living in slums. So we have almost a quarter urban population of urban citizens today living in slums, in informal settlements. Of course, I've been advocating and trying to promote more and more planning, city planning, more and more regional planning, regional governance, but we have not achieved this important global goal of having of our urban population living in well-planned cities which offer a good standards of quality of life and, of course, access to basic services. So today, 1 billion are without access to basic services, without access to tenant land, without access to really medium or high standards of quality. And that is a very recent figure, because we just released this year's report on the SDGs implementation, Sustainable Development Goals implementation, from the UN Secretary General, and that's one of the bad news of this new report. For instance, 99% of the world urban population breathe polluted air in our cities. This is virtually all urban population is breathing polluted air. This is one of the most important problems our cities today. For instance, 82% of the waste is being collected, but from that, the 55% is being collected informally. So we have at least a half of the global urban waste being collected informally, being not processed. Of course, also result on several health and low standard of quality problems. And of course, we have different, this is the global figure, but of course we have among the world regions, we have different prominence of these problems. We have seen that the developing regions, the developing countries, mostly on Latin America, Africa, and Asia are the most affected. Of course, we have one proposal, which is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is actually a transition. This is not the first global agenda, as you may know. This is a transition from a first global agenda established in the beginning of this millennium, year 2000, which were the Millennium Development Goals. No, had a horizon, time horizon to be achieved in 2015. They were not achieved, so for that reason, the international community decided to advance to another global agenda, which were the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And within that agenda, we have one specific goal on cities, the SDG 11, which is related to make cities and community more sustainable, more safe, more resilient, and more equitable. But in total, we have 17 goals, 169 targets, and 231 indicators. All of those indicators, target, and goal are very general because they have to be agreed by 193 countries around the world. So you can imagine the discussion between, for instance, the Arab world and the West, or between the global North and the South, or between Latin American realities and African ones. The discussion is very difficult to make a consensus, no? So, for instance, for that reason, all the global agendas, especially the Sustainable Development Goals, are general. But what is our responsibility as academics and as decision makers, as politicians, is to territorialize those general agendas. No, that's one of the reasons of the purpose of that, why we are here today, to learn to territorialize, how to bring the global reality to the architectural scale. Of course, going through another intermediate scale, no, the regional, the metropolitan, the urban scale. But the final goal, I think that if we want to improve quality of life of citizens, maybe from architectural projects, we need to be aware of those global goals, of those global challenges. And actually, if you study the relationships between the SDG 11 and the other SDGs, you can find a strong linkages. At least 10 of the other SDGs are direct linked, direct related with sustainable cities and communities. No? And this is different from other global agendas and for past global agendas. Between this is the agenda that put a strong relation between all the goals, all the targets, the indicators. So, as well as with other global agendas, you may have about the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, the New Urban Agenda adopted in Quito, in Ecuador in 2016, the Addis Abeba for Agreement for Economic Development, the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Management. All of those are interlinked and related to the good management and planning of cities and territories. These are some of the examples that you can find afterwards. I will give you these links of these resources, of these publications, and you can access to them for free afterwards and analyze these relationships and this example in detail. But for instance, I just want to give you a couple of examples. Can you imagine that we can achieve gender equality, for instance, without urban institutions being with high participation of women? No, it cannot. So we need to strengthen our urban institutions, our urban governance, our urban systems in order to achieve other sustainable development goals. For instance, can you imagine achieve climate action without having sustainable development, sustainable transport, public transport? You cannot. Can you achieve a really climate action without diminishing global emissions? You cannot. And most of the global emissions are being produced where? In cities, no? In big and largest metropolis. So through this example, you can find the several linkages between management of cities and territories and the global challenges, the global agenda. So that's why actually the former Secretary General of United Nations, Mr. Ban Ki-moon, used to say, the battle for sustainable development will be lost or gained in cities and through cities. And to do that, we need to find how are the cities of today. Not only where are they or how many we have, no, but how. How are the cities? How are the most recent trends of urban and territorial growth and development? And we have found something very interesting, some very common trend along the world regions. And it is that as the world is becoming, as the world is accelerating urban, it is also becoming metropolitan. No? And let me to elaborate more on that. At least 2.6 billion of people, which means 60% of our urban population, lives today in metropolitan areas, in metropolitan regions. No? Mostly of the urban population of the world lives in one specific typology of city, which is the metropolitan space, the metropolitan regions. No? And this is, and we have metropolises, metropolitan spaces, metropolitan cities, metropolitan zones with different names, which depends, of course, of legal, cultural, and traditional context and territorial context in each country and each regions. We can find them with a lot of different names, but they all respond to one specific reality, and that they are functional territories. So for UN Habitat, when we speak about metropolitan spaces, metropolitan regions, we are speaking about functional territories. We are trying to have pragmatic change from the traditional ways of understanding the territory, the political geography, the ways in our cities were divided, to the functional geography, which is the way in which the cities actually use it, the city, no? How the city can be used, how the city can offer opportunities for development and can offer more high quality standards of life, no? So to do that, we need to understand the city by their functionality, by their territorial dimension. We have here, and this is a map that I like a lot from Antonella and the MS Lab, the map of Piacenza, and of course, Piacenza is not an island. Piacenza is connected to a territorial reality, a territorial dynamic, which is actually metropolitan one. We cannot speak maybe of Piacenza like a metropolitan area or a metropolitan city, which you know it here in Italy, but we can speak Piacenza as part of a big metropolitan region, no? From Milan to Bologna and others connected to others important Italian cities, no? But this is the reality, the common reality of most of the cities in the world. You can see here several examples of Europe. Of course, we have the traditional, the ancient city of London, the traditional and the metropolis for excellence, the London, no? When we hear in the past about metropolises, we use it to think about London, New York, Tokyo, Jakarta, Seoul, but today it's different. Why? Because urban extension have surpassed urban population growth, and this had happened both in developing and developed countries. So let me repeat that, and I want you to have this like a big takeaway of this lecture. Urban extension have surpassed urban population growth. So if the relation between both were equally in the recent decades, we have, of course, the same proportion. We must to have the same proportion between urban population growth and urban spatial growth. But the reality is that urban extension have double or triplicated the urban population growth. So for instance, if we have in India or in China cities that are growing approximately 10%, have 10% of urban growth yearly, that means that in 13 or 15 years, double the urban population. And that also means that in that period of time, 13 or 50 years, the territory covered by the city the urban extension grows 3, 4, or 5 times. So we have found that cities are preferring the extension model rather than the density or the compactness. So all the urban agendas, the global agendas, new urban agendas, sustainable development goals, Paris Agreement promote compactness of cities, densification. But we have found that along the world regions are preferring extension models. No? So because of that, of course, that the urban dynamics have surpassed also the city proper, the municipal boundaries. And today we can find citizens that live in one municipality but works in another, or that live in one municipality but access to goods and services in another one, and mostly in the surrounding of the principal municipality of the city. But those agglomerations, those urban agglomerations, are conforming very connected and functional territories. So in the past, this also happened in London and in New York and in Tokyo, because those were the only ones with the necessary bigger population extension to cover more territory. But today, we can find, for instance, in Croatia, the Zagreb urban agglomeration with approximately 1 million people. What we can find in Bratislava, in Slovakia, a metropolitan region with 73 municipalities and only 600,000 inhabitants. So cities of all the sizes are responding to the same territorial dynamics, not only in Europe, of course, in other regions. We have here Seoul, we have here Guadalajara in Mexico, we have Johannesburg in South Africa, and we have, for instance, Medellin in Colombia, no? And so on and so on, several. So we have some trends about that growth, about those development. The first one, metropolitan population will grow rapidly during the coming decades. So today, remember, 60% urban population is living in metropolitan areas and spaces, 60% of urban population. But in the coming decades, in the 15 years, actually in the next 15 years, more than 1 new million people will become metropolitan inhabitants. So if today we have 2.6 billion, in 2035, we will have 3.5 billion people living in metropolitan areas worldwide. On average, one metropolis will have every 2 weeks in the next 15 years as well. So in the next 50 years, we will have 429 new metropolises, new metropolitan spaces around the world. This means cities which will be continue conurbating. No? This means that cities will continue preferring the extension model rather than the compactiveness or the densification. No? This is another good trend, an important trend. We live in a world of small and intermediate metropolises. This is also different from the imaginarios we used to have, because we used to hear that the world is becoming a world of megacities, of big cities, and every day more and more megacities will arise, and the data shows us the opposite. The world is consolidating as a world of intermediate and small metropolises and small cities. That's why, of course, citizens are choosing a small metropolis, because they can offer more quality of life, a more quiet life, more access to opportunities, also more vibrant cities, rather than the congestion, the traffic congestion, the insecurity of megacities. But the reality is that among the world, we have almost 2,000 metropolises, and from they, only 85 can be termed as large metropolises. Only 34 megacities with more than 10 million inhabitants, another 50, approximately 51, between 5 and 10 million inhabitants. The rest of the world cities, of the almost 2,000 metropolises we have, are intermediate and small cities. No? And that also gives us a panorama of how urban and architectural and territorial projects have to be planned during the coming decades. No? We need more and more architects and urban planners for small and intermediate cities than for megacities. Megacities will continue to exist, of course, but they are not the biggest and the most representative group of cities. Next one, urban population growth and the emergence of new metropolises are related. So this confirms the hypothesis that citizens and policymakers are preferring more extended cities because more population give us to more and more urban agglomeration, and this is a global trend as well. And the most worrying one, metropolitan growth will be led by developing regions. So as well as urban growth, population growth, also metropolitan growth will be led by developing regions. And this is worrying because the developing regions are the ones that more help, that have less resources, less economic resources, less technical capacities to make a good management of the territory, but also were the most hit by the pandemic. Actually, the 2020 and 2021 reports, the SDGs of UN Secretary General about SDG, told us that Latin America, Africa, and most principally Asia Pacific, most principally Southeast Asia, were the most hit by the pandemic. Actually, in those regions, the pandemic meant like a 2 or 3 decades of developing, of underdeveloped in goals related to health, to economy, and to education. No? And those will be the most affected by this, also by these trends. This is a quick glance of the regional comparisons. Comparisons, of course, are not just mostly of the times, but we need to have them. You have regional comparisons about the metropolitan and the urban growth during the next decades, and the today also the today map of the metropolitan prominence along the world regions, and you can see that Asia Pacific, maybe you can not see well here because of the contrast, but Asia Pacific represent most of the half of metropolitan population in the world. 56% of metropolitan population is living in Asia Pacific metropolises. No? At the same with the number of metropolises. Of the almost 2,000 existing metropolises, 1,018 are located in Asia Pacific, 400 in China, almost 200 in India, almost 600 between those both. And the other Asia Pacific nations, another 500 approximately, for a total of more than 1,000 metropolises in Asia Pacific. And you can see the difference between the Asia Pacific and the other regions. The other regions have more comparable numbers and prominence both in metropolitan population and in number of metropolises. For instance, you can compare here Latin America and Africa, which are, the difference is above 1%, above of 2% with North America, and above of 2% with Europe. No? In metropolitan population, here the number of metropolis change a little, the distribution between Europe, Africa, and Latin America. You can see here in metropolitan population, Latin American first, in number of metropolis, Europe first, but the numbers, the figures are very similar, very comparable. Totally different with a specific reality. And now what to do with that? And also this is bad news because we have found, like we call it, a metropolitan gap. One thing is the existing metropolises, in reality, the cities that has become urban agglomeration in recent years, and other thing is the ones that are being managed like that. No? So we can have several and thousands of metropolises around the world, but the reality is that a minimum part of that are being managed as metropolises. This means that the mostly of those cities are not being managed in a collaborative way. They have not metropolitan plans, they have not metropolitan institution to manage that reality. You can see also here the figures. Europe in that regard is a little more advanced. maybe 1/3 of their metropolis being managed in a metropolitan way, so in a cooperative way. But the other regions, Latin America, for instance, only 11%, African, less than 10%, and Asia Pacific, the very bad news, the worst news. And why? Because as you remember, Asia Pacific is the most prominent both in metropolitan population and number of metropolises. But you can see here that only the 6.6% of Asia Pacific metropolis have or a plan or an institution to manage that metropolitan reality in a collaborative way. So mostly of those metropolises lack of metropolitan solutions. That was my first part of the presentation, my first part of the lecture. I can imagine that now you can understand better why I say at the beginning that global challenges are both global but also metropolitan. Because we used to say in UN Habitat, cities are the physical manifestation of humanity. And today, in the 21st century, cities are overall metropolitan. So global challenges, of course, have to have a metropolitan solution. And the second, we have proved that in the recent past, because metropolises have shown how to overcome global crises. And to trying to find how, we need to recognize first that global crises do not care about political boundaries. No, the global pandemic, the migration dynamics, the decline of democracy, no, the climate change, the negative impacts caused by climate change. All of those exacerbated actually because the pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, do not recognize municipal or political or administrative boundaries. So the pandemic advanced without care about it. The municipality have finished in one border, no? But also the climate change is advancing right now as we speak without caring about this is a municipality, or this is a city, or this is a region, or even this is a country. If we can have a good lesson from the pandemic is that no city and no country could to solve and to address the crisis adequately alone. So we always need collaboration between national, local, regional governments, always. We studied, for instance, during the pandemic, we studied nearly of 2 governance arrangements in 80 countries around the world, in blue in the map. And we found that the metropolitan governance played like a helpfully role to overcome the crisis, no? And this is not difficult to think because, for instance, governments that used to collaborate before the pandemic were also able to implement in a more quickly way the measures, the recovery, the adaptation, the mitigation measures, but also to more quickly, to come to more population with the solutions, no? But also the fact that the governments were used to collaborate also caused a better legitimacy to their actions for the citizens. So the citizens of metropolitan regions, of metropolitan areas, were more used to own the solutions and to apply them. Of course, we published all these cases that I am speaking about. You can consult it in this report, the Cities and Pandemic Report from UN Habitat. You have the link here where we analyzed all those arrangements, all those cases, and we actually analyzed several perspectives of urban and territorial consequence of the pandemic during the first year. So the first 3 waves or so on. The third one, some metropolitan governance cases, how some metropolises are advocating and promoting for these more collaborative solutions and to implement more collaborative approaches. And the question here is, if metropolises are economically, socially, environmentally integrated, why not to integrate their management? No? If, as we have here, the urban dynamics, the citizens dynamics surpassed the municipal boundaries, so that way have to be also the responses from the local governments, from the decision makers, from the urban planners. They have to be a collaborative and supra-municipal response. So always when we speak about governance, we like to speak at least of three dimensions of governance: the institutional one, the institutional solutions, which involves both formal and informal arrangements. We also speak about decision-making mechanisms, which involve the governing bodies taking the decision and the knowledge management to make the decision informed, and also the collective action, which is actually the core of metropolitan and regional management, no? The collective action. And we spoke about administrative acts and development visions, joint visions for development. Three of them are very frequent factors in governance literature. The other three ones are like innovative elements or no so and common analyzed elements. So we study, for instance, different metropolises around the world, different cases, including Valle de Aburrá in Colombia, you may win as Medellin, San Salvador in Central America, Montreal in North America, in Canada, the Greater London, of course, metropolitan area of Barcelona, Bratislava self-government region, the metropolitan city of Johannesburg, Singapore also, which is a very different case. But all of those representing a different metropolitan realities in terms of all of these categories: jurisdictional, territorial, population, economic, political context. All of those are different. No, you can find, for instance, metropolises with 82 municipalities, as the case of Montreal, or only metropolises with 6 districts, as the case of Singapore, or with 14 municipalities of San Salvador. You can find, for instance, a population of 4 million in Medellin in Colombia, or 10 million in London, or less than a million in Bratislava. And you can find also very different economies. For instance, 7,000 US dollars per capita in Medellin, or 65,000 per capita in Singapore. You can find also cities which are, or metropolis, which are capital of the country, or others that are not, and also different political context. And the news there, the message is that metropolitan governance have been achieved in all those cases. Metropolitan governance have been consolidated in all those cases. So there is no excuses for metropolitan governance. Also, those ideas or excuses that you use it to hear in, no, in metropolitan governance because we are a small, and we cannot work in a collaborative way because we have not a lot of municipalities. We are a lot of municipalities, difficult to agree. Or we cannot work on metropolitan projects or architectural projects with metropolitan impact because we have not a good economy. No, there are no excuses. All of those cases, all of those cities have been able to consolidate metropolitan solutions. We can see a couple of examples. For instance, social urbanism in Medellin with metropolitan scale, 10 municipalities. They actually have very good governance, a metropolitan board, metropolitan council, also informal management, metropolitan, regional, and city with the citizens in order to hear needs, and they have also data, and a metropolitan vision joint for development and vision to the middle century, no? The same case with San Salvador in Central America, 14 municipalities, almost 2 million people. They have also several metropolitan governing bodies and institutions working together. They have a very good practice, which is called the Metropolitan School of Local Development. They train to practitioners, they trade to public servants in order to implement metropolitan projects and also metropolitan solutions. We have also the case of Montreal in Canada, 82 municipalities. They have what we call in institutional theory a fragmentation, institutional fragmentation, but this is one of a few cases in where institutional fragmentation have worked. Metropolitan institutions, but they achieve it to articulate between them and to a good management and proper management of the territory. And they have a very interesting informal arrangement, which is the Metropolitan Agora. Every 2 years, they sit with almost 500 citizens to plan, not only to listen, but also to include proposal and to design projects, urban projects, rural projects with citizens, and to include the plan in the metropolitan plans. And every 2 years, they make the following, the monitor of this project. No? So citizens can be accountable for those proposals. This is a very interesting, inspiring practice in Montreal. And we only have here in Europe, in Slovakia, the Bratislava government region, which have, as I said before, 73 municipalities, less than 1 million people, and they also to consolidate a metropolitan system, a metropolitan government. No? I will do more cases, or I think it could be interesting for you, but you can consult all the cases in the publication. And my last part, the last part of my presentation, which can be the, so recap, no? First, the global challenges are global and metropolitan. Why? Because the war is becoming a metropolitan war. No? Second one, we need, or metropolitan governance have been proved as a good solution, as a good approach for global crisis, no? For global sustainable crisis. The third one, we can find several, along the world regions, we can find several examples, several inspiring cases on how metropolitan have worked, no? In different economic, political, population, and extension context, no? Territorial extension context. And four, the last one, which can be the lessons for the years to come. Because as you may know, we are passing through what the Secretary General of United Nations has called like the decade of action, which is from 2020 to 20 in the last decade to achieve the global goals, the global development agendas, no? And very, very bad in that way. What can we do? So we have proposed from UN Habitat at least lessons. You can also consult it in this publication, 10 lessons to overcome the global crisis and to achieve sustainable development. First one, well, you can have here some lessons more related with governance, some lessons more related with policy, and some lessons more related with international cooperation. But let me take you through quickly from that. The first one, cooperation, collective action must be at the center. So, as I said before, one of the principal lessons from the pandemic and the other global crises is that no city and no country can alone those kind of challenges. No, we need more integrative, more cooperation approach, intermunicipal, interregional, and even international solutions, no, and approaches. We need more and more collective action. Second, participation, consult people is not enough, and this is very valid for you as architects, as urban planners. You cannot be easy only consulting the people, only hearing the people. You can necessary to include the people proposal, the citizen proposals within the policy, in the projects, within the plans, no? And we have also saw that during the pandemic because several citizens that were not consulted when adopting the measures simply rejected them, no? And that didn't apply them. So we need a real contributing participation citizens from all the public actors. The tier one, metropolises. Some approaches to urbanization could be outdated. So this specific municipal or very local, very urban approach to sustainable development, to urban management is outdated nowadays. Nowadays, we are seeing that the territorial dynamic is a metropolitan one, so we need also metropolitan solutions, metropolitan approaches, collaborative ones. For inequity or inequality, the most affected ones are still the same. That thing that we heard during the pandemic, that the pandemic is a crisis that affects all the people in the same, was not true. We saw with the time that was not true because, of course, any people, any person can be hit by the virus, but the consequences are not the same. For instance, the woman, the elderly, the disabled, the most vulnerable people were the most affected as well by the pandemic, no? As today is also occurring with natural. For instance, the developing countries and the less developed countries, which are the ones that contributed the less with the global emissions, are the most affected ones because they have not the proper planning system, they have not the enough financial resources to address the crisis, no? And the same occurred with the pandemic, the same is occurring today with migrations, with democracy, etc. Prosperity, we need multidimensional visions for urban development. And this is also very important for you as architects. That vision of cities that were only about structure and economy are also outdated. Today, to have a good city, a good quality of life, a good environment, we need also care about environment. We need also care about quality of life, about equity, about social inclusion, about governance. We need really multidimensional visions for new cities or for a better urban future. 6, digitalization. We should to be very cautious because, of course, the pandemic and the recent trends have shown us digitalization as the new revolution, and it is true, a new revolution is coming about digitalization, but we need to avoid that this digital revolution becomes the second industrial revolution, in the sense that mostly of the today inequities is result from the bad implemented industrial revolution. No? There's difference the industrial process between the north and the south and the most developed and less developed countries could be with the digital revolution. So we can be generating more gaps, more developing gaps, if we cannot make a good of digital revolution. This means that not all the services, not all the public services have to go online at the same time, no? Or not all the cities have to be digital at the same time or quickly as they are today. They need to implement the digital transit very progressive, a very progressive way, no? In order also to close this gap or this urban and digital gap. The 7, recovery. Metropolis change the future. Metropolis are the hubs of ideas, of people. Of course, the people and urban agglomeration also produce collective intelligence, also produce more dynamic economies, more dynamic culture, intercultural environments, but we need to manage that in an integrative way. Because if not, we will not able to take advantage of those resources, of those assets, and instead we will continue to having more divided metropolises and inequalities in metropolises. No, we need a very good comprehensive approach to become metropolises away. In that, I very like the approach of Professor Contina about having a metropolitan discipline, no? The metropolitan discipline, which is have a new generations of urban planning, of academics thinking about metropolitan solutions, current metropolitan trends. The eighth one about SDG territorialization. Sustainable Development Goals, as I said at the beginning, are very general. The global agendas are general. So we really need to territorialize them. We really need to agree in national targets, in local targets, because otherwise it will be very difficult to achieve a better sustainable development. 9, the new urban agenda and the other city diplomacy mechanisms are the future of multilateralisms, and we are seeing this more and more every day. The common environment, the most common environment for international relationships, for international cooperations at the beginning, several decades ago, was the nations, the states, no? Actually, the United Nations was created by nations, by national governments. But nowadays we are seeing, and we saw always this with the pandemic, is more easy to collaborate between local governments more quickly. No, painfully the international cooperation system is getting more and more complex as we speak, and we need more soft networks, more soft solutions in order to improve the international collaboration. So the city diplomacy, a direct collaboration between local governments and territorial actors is the future for multilateralism. And the last one, COVID-19 is only first call for action. This was only, we can say like a test, no? The climate catastrophe, the finish of democracy can be at the corner. If we cannot act now, if we cannot use this decade of action to care about the global goals, the global commitment, the global challenges, the global problems, maybe in the next generations, the COVID-19 will be seen like a game, no? Compared with the new crises and new challenges to come. And that's all. Thank you. And worry because I think that I extended the time. I would like to pass the floor to Antonella in order to try to make a better link between this reality that can be difficult sometimes to apply and to understand by architects, but I think that you, Antonella, have a very good for trying to find these links between the architectural project, between the architectural missions, and these global trends and global challenges. Okay.
Time. Right now. No. I add something, but I don't know if we have time. A question and
In my mind, I would like to see the world in which we are able, with some actions, to stop this movement to occupy all. So that is my point.
Yes, we have tried to stop it. We have really tried. That's why I mentioned it that, for instance, the new urban agenda, the sustainable development goals, the Paris Agreement, climate change, all of those promote more compacted cities, meaning less territory, less urban extension, and also more connectivity, more compactness. No? We have tried to advocate for it, but cities have not done that. Yes, have not done that. No, cities prefer, and I don't know why. I think that because the velocity of the process, because of course this urban development has two particularities. Let's say first, it's a long-term trend. So this is one trend that started maybe from the end of the Middle Age and continue until today, but every day more quickly. No? So this is a very long-term trend. And the second one, this is of course an economic trend as well. So an economic trend also means that the cities found that when they agglomerate people, also agglomerate economies and produce more and more resources and food and services as economy. This is like I don't know if you call it like a virtuous or vicious circle, but it is a circle. Yes. And it seems not have to have a stop, at least in the coming few years. No? Actually, we have some projections. We work all of this with the United Nations Statistical and Population Divisions. We also take the figures and the numbers from each country statistical office, national office. And in the trend that we have, it says that until the end of this century, the end of 21st century, it seems that the global population growth will start to stabilize. Today, we only have one world region which is virtually stabilized, which is Eastern Europe, both in population and in urban growth, metropolitan growth. But the rest of the regions and overall in less developing countries, less developing regions, the trend will be still accelerated by a couple of decades on, no? For instance, Africa, Latin America, Asia Pacific.
So you accept this economical organization of the world. So you don't have any doubts about our economical system. You follow that in a way. I know that. It's just to have a discussion.
No, and it is important. The international cooperation, for instance, the role of UN Habitat and other international cooperation agency is trying to promote, and especially from 2000 and 2015 with these global agendas, is trying to promote sustainable solutions. So we saw the trends and try to find ways on how to address those trends. But we have no role in controlling the trend. We have no role in changing the trend. Because the role in changing the trend is of citizens, of practitioners, of academics, of all actors. It's the role of changing the trend. But what we can do is following the trend, analyzing the trend, and promote a kind of way to achieve sustainability passing through the trend. No? And what we can learn from Habitat is that, of course, we need more land, we need more plants, we need more institutions, we need more sustainable projects, architectural projects, and overall in developing countries and in developing regions, which are the most affected by this trend. And we are trying to promote also commitments, global commitments, to try to stop those trends. No? And quickly, for instance, in SDG and urban agenda, where states and nations agreed to try to diminish the extension of the cities by the half in the next 15 years. This is not achieved today. They're trying to avoid having more slums and more informality, informal settlement. That was not achieved. And for instance, and that is a good analysis between MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals,
from 2000, and the SDGs from 2015. For instance, within the MDGs, within the Millennium Development Goals, the nation, the states adopted one target about taking out at least 200,000 of inhabitants living in slums in 15 years, from 2000 to 2015. And the target complied. They complied with the target. Actually, they surpassed the complied. They took out, I think, 500,000 million people from slums. What is the problem? That at the same time, more and more slums were created. So you are taking out people from slums, but at the same time, more and more slums, because these trends are being created, because local governments have not the capacity to address this trend, this growth. So people in developing regions are located in the periphery, more and more in the periphery of the city. And of course, if you are in the periphery, it's very difficult to the local governments with the financial resources that they have to bring you good services, good infrastructure. But citizens only look for new opportunities of development, and they understand cities as the hub for opportunities. So they don't care about living in the periphery or living in slums or living in crowded places, crowded buildings, but because they are looking for more opportunity, more employment, more education. So that is the situation, and we from UN, what we can do is, okay, we have known that this was solved in one place in that way, and maybe we can learn from that, and maybe we can exchange with other places in order to avoid the common errors, common mistakes. But it is almost impossible to stop the trend. You want to add something?
I don't think that we could ask the United Nations to control the political power of the nation. What we try to do is to educate people to the sustainability. So I think that is a role of university. Try to understand, so they should give us an image of the trend, but it's our duty to be able to define new model of development that should stop this kind of conurbation. For example, we discussed a lot since Montelia, so I guess 7 years ago, about the fact that for a lot of people, the metropolitan issue was a conurbation, but not a metropolitan shape. So we have to define a metropolitan new shape. For example, Piacenza, is not possible to consider Piacenza as a circle that has to be aligned. So, but that is our capability to understand the trend and not continue to speak about the center of Piacenza as a circle where every function, every people has to converge. So they give us an image. Italy signed an agreement. So it's the Italian political power that has to accept this vision, and in our academic program introduce this point of view. They can control, fortunately, otherwise we should have a big brother that should control. And so I don't think that you should say you accept this economical trend. Always speaking about the fact that multilateral and when habitat or when nation such as in the world situation should control or should accept that they can't control. It's a political issue. Every state has to accept is a vision. Metropolis is a vision. We don't have compulsory metropolitan plan. We are only a vision, and that is the point. Which kind of role for an architect? Thinking that it's not anymore a director of orchestra, but we have to work all together as in a quartet and not in an orchestra. We have to change our point of view. And that is a role of university. Again, we cannot change it, but we can suggest to our young students as a vision.
So it's a political, but also I would like to insist it's an economic issue, an economic problem. Here, maybe in the developed countries, you can find the rural very connected to the urban. So you can, for instance, go from a urban center to a rural periphery in half an hour, because you have a train, you have rails. But in developing country and in less developed, you have not that. Have not. So citizens living in rural areas, even geographically near to cities, spend 3 or 4 hours going from the city center to the rural periphery. And that is, of course, they prefer to live in the periphery of the city. And they don't care if it's informal, it's dumb, it's crowded, but they prefer spend 1 hour going from the periphery to the center of the city than 4 hours. And of course, they are looking at, as I said before, what they care are economic opportunities. They are looking for economic opportunities. And they don't find that in the countryside, in the rural areas. They found that in developing and less developing countries, they found at least a minimum of that in the city core. And let me say something, and then I pass to you. Let me say something more about how the international community works, because international community also needs resources to work properly. So, for instance, yesterday I said, we, UN Habitat, which are one of the small agencies of the United Nations system, we are present in 400 cities. We have projects in 400 cities, 500 cities, approximately. And we have offices in 60 countries. But we have almost 2,000 MetroHubs. We are present with, not always with big projects, but big, medium, and small projects in total in 500 cities, which is not even a quarter of all the world cities. So, of course, national leaders and local authorities continue to ask international community for solutions, but they are not apporting more resources for more solutions. So we have not more technical capacities for more problems every day. At the opposite, we have less resources and less capacities every day. For instance, with the pandemic, you saw the crisis of the World Health Organization, when the US government tried to take out the resources that they give yearly. Unfortunately, now it is almost sorted again, but if the contributors, if the partners, if the associated of international communities, which are the governments, the states, doesn't provide enough resources, it's very difficult for the international community to provide good solutions, proper solutions.
My intuition is just to disagree when it's to be kind of a trend, of course, it gets to interfere on the policy. It's somewhat, and I think it's super difficult to kind of see, as you presented in a very synthetic way, a very hyper complex and diverse situation in the world. And what I think, or what I could add to this discussion is that probably, of course, I understand that you have less resources, it's very complex, etc. But the diversity of all this, I know that you have like a totally different cultures and things in kind of direction. But for example, this could be one example of the representation that I tried to contribute. That is, of course, the expansion of the cities are much bigger than the growth population. That's what you want everybody to keep on their problem. And the other way, you said that the slums are a problem. Of course, no one knows who lives in slums. I know quite well the value of the work there. And I don't know if you consider, you might consider this a slum or not. But as you know, the change in the last 30 years changed completely the policy of Brazil. Because at the beginning they were destroying slums to build more houses. That doesn't mean, and this is, I think, it's important to stress because of the diversity of the country and because of the diversity of all complex of probability. Doesn't mean destroying people's development. I'm explaining this precisely because that's why I know. Building new buildings doesn't mean making a better quality of life for dead people. Maybe it looks like a better quality of life, but it's not. Maybe it works exactly like you were saying, or what kind of not so bad way or policy, no policy, but expansion of the city. Because if you, as you know, that was in Brazil, the huge amount of persons, if you destroy all kinds of like buildings, way of living, they would have like 80% more urban expansion. So to say that they changed the policy of the slums, and they are, as you know, they are trying to recover, build inside the slums, making space, implements, trying to stay there for water solution, etc. For instance, some Territorial solution of some. So the question is, I'm just telling you or warning these also students in the sense that diversity is very big. And it's not just like that. You show a bit that there is a lot of complexity on that. So I think that, of course, for example, the equality of gender interferes with a lot of things. Normally, of course, I always say that everybody speaks about a lot of things, but never speaks that if you want really equal gender equality, you have to play. The woman can stay, or the man can stay with the kid, because the problem of the women is that, of course, if you want to make a family, they are taxed with the career. So, the examples of that. Northern countries, a big thing. They put a lot of money on that, not so much. Because one thing is, Scandinavian countries can have these resources, and other countries cannot have resources in the European. I'm just saying that because we make it such simple, and I understand that it used to make it simple. There's a lot of complexity behind it, and it's not so easy to resolve or try to get a picture.
Well, that is a very important point. If we go deep in the reasons or within the causes of this trend, we will find, of course, several contradictions, but also political problems. But you are speaking about one interesting solution, one technical solution for slums, which are the one that not only Brazil, but also another countries in Latin America have started to implement it, which is like Japanese call it, let's say something similar to inclusive land readjustment. No? And Japanese have worked a lot on that. We cannot destroy a favela and displace the citizens to another part of the city because first, because we are contributing with urban extension, and second, as you say, and second, because of course those communities have also a culture, roads there already. So if we try to analyze the solutions, we can find several, not only in Brazil, but in other countries. But I think that, for instance, for the students, for future urban planners and urban architects, that solution is very interesting. No? We need more and more inclusive solutions, more inclusive not only land readjustment, but also inclusion in migration policies, inclusion and integration, because Antonella will say, yeah, inclusion is different to integration. So we need both, integrate and include new kind of citizens in all the urban reality. No? That is another problem specifically with the slums. It's very problematic in Brazil, I know, which is where the slums are located commonly. They are located commonly in But land, I mean, land that could be affected by natural disasters, for instance. And for instance, in Brazil, in Northeast Brazil, the Grotas in Alagoas state has that problem. They tried to build the new equipment, the new housing solutions in the same territory where the slums were present at the beginning, but the land started to come, no? This. Yes, disintegrate. Yes. So that is the problem with the slums as well. But also, what is that? Not only in the SDG related to cities, but in all the SDGs, in all sustainable development goals, in all global agendas, international community is trying to change the approach to not only to a urgent and assistentialist approach, but also to a preventive approach. No? So the international community realized that the need is not only to address the current urgency, but also to plan to avoid new urgencies. No? So that's why it was not enough to take out people from the slums, but the proper solution, the right solution, is to plan the new cities. No? And that is very important in this trend, because from here to the end of the century, we will build more cities, more urban territory than in the last 2 millennia. That is one thing that I didn't mention in the trend, but in the next decades, we will construct more cities, more urban territory than in the last 2 millennia. Because of course, the global population will stabilize within that in the next 5 or 6 decades, but not the urban growth. The urban growth will continue. So at the end of the century, as I said, 90% of global population will be living in cities. 90% of urban population will be living in cities. Today is 56.
Now? So we have.
Yes, I knew it. So first of all, I want to thank you for your deployed effort in the presentation. And second, I don't have a question, but I have an intervention on a point that you have mentioned, which is participation of the citizens. And I have seen one for the conception of cities. I have seen an approach which is based on the participation of children. And it was really an interesting experience because they put a lot of interest in the participation of children through their drawings. So they ask children to just draw the city that they imagine, and they have found that children has already an image of the city that how it should be, and they have the ideas that we are looking for, that are problems nowadays, and that we are looking for solutions. For example, one of the drawings they have seen, for example, they have one building with a lot of members of family, which can explain the density, and they draw also a river next to the building. But nowadays, what we see is that always the city is far from the river. So we are trying to find a communication or a solution of how to bring people to the river, or how to draw, how to address this issue. Or, for example, they draw also trees next to the building, while the problem, it's another problem, which is urban sprawl, that destroys every forests or trees to build a lot of buildings. So that was in this approach, there were a lot of psychologists to analyze these drawings, and it was easy even to convince the parents of the children that this is what should be, because they don't eventually they don't need density. So it was a way to convince people that this is how your children want a life. So that was a good experience, because I have watched all the documentary, and it was interesting. I wanted to share it because children has a lot to say.
For because it seems that with the mic off, why I was becoming a phonics, but I now understand. But that is a very good example, no, on how children can understand and find solutions to the future of their cities. No, I really dream with an age, with a timing when all the schools, all the universities include a sustainability cathedral within their syllabus, within their courses, within their programs. No, from children to young people to professionals to practitioners. No, how do we really collectively can find those kind of solutions? No, that is a very good experience. Actually, that is one of the purpose of the decade of action. It is called like that, the decade of action, because the UN Secretary General is asking for global, governmental, private, personal actions, no? From global to personal actions. Actually, I encourage you of the decade of action, because they have like a manual, like a handbook on how to contribute to sustainable development goals, even when you are resting seeing TV, no? Because we always have a way to contribute with sustainable agendas, with sustainable goals, no? I will wrap up here because I know that you have another activities. We also have a field visit there through the Via Emilia. So thank you again for your time, and I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you.
anyway. So thank you all for participating. I remind to who came and didn't sign first to do it before going back to the ateliers. Okay. To have now and the outside if the weather stays as it is, hopefully. So see you at 8.